Dheeraj, your screen is tilted. You probably need to change the angle. Yeah, it's good now.
And you're on mute.
Oh man, I think there's an app that's needed for this. It tells you when you're speaking on mute. So sorry for
Hello,
being a bit late.
yeah.
Hi, Isabel.
Hi,
We're
Dheeraj.
good to
Hi.
Sure, I think so. In the interest of time, let's get started. So, welcome to all the panelists and all the participants to the event. The event is called Agri-Foodtech in India, Scaling Beyond Borders. The event is organized jointly by ThinkAg and Future Food Asia 2021. For those who are not familiar with ThinkAg, we are a platform to accelerate adoption of innovations in the food and agricultural space through partnerships and collaborations. And I want to take this opportunity to thank all the ThinkAg members who have supported us in our journey for the last 2 years. A very, very special thanks to Future Food Asia team, Isabel and Abhinav in particular, who've been working very hard with us in putting this event together. So thanks very much to both of you and rest of the team for working with us in this event. Before we get started with the panel discussion, let me just take 2 minutes to set the context and then introduce the panelist. If you look at the Indian agri-food tech ecosystem, it's maturing. In my opinion, there are about 1,000 plus active agri-tech startups in the country already. And the number is growing like by a few hundreds every year. So that's a pretty good sign. If you look at the business model, the focus for many of them when they started was essentially Indian market. You know, the banks, the insurance companies, the food processing companies, the agri-input companies, but mostly looking at the Indian market. But how, as we are seeing startups who begun to mature and gaining confidence in the solutions, and also from the gaining confidence from their customers as well as the investors, we are seeing more and more startups looking at markets outside India. And Southeast Asia in particular is a very, very important and interesting destination for most of the Indian startups. Asian markets in particular, like of Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, who have very similar demographics, very similar farm profiles dominated by smallholder farmers, similar crops, and very similar challenges in the farming community, like access to markets, credit, input, data, and advisory. I think that makes these solutions coming out of India portable to any part of the world, but in particular, Southeast Asia, which has a lot of resemblance in terms of the challenges that we see in those geographies. Of course, founders are trying to solve it through their own efforts. Some of them have already set up offices in these countries. Some are successful, some are not so successful. So I think the big question that we're trying to address today on this webinar is how do we as an ecosystem partners, as ThinkAg, as Future Food Asia, and all the people on the call who are joining us, how do we catalyze this transition? How do we make this more efficient for entrepreneurs to go from one country to another country? And to discuss that, we have a stellar panel with me. I couldn't have asked for more, who understand this subject really well. So let me just briefly introduce them. We have Jonathan Chen. He's APEC Digital Advisor for Cargill Digital Labs. We have Rahul Savani. He's President South Asia for Corteva Agri Sciences. We have Dheeraj Mehta, who's the Director with Temasek. Krishna Kumar, Founder and CEO Crop-in Technology. Taranjeet Singh Bhamra is the CEO of AgNext Technologies. And last but not the least, the partner Isabel, Founder and CEO for ID Capital. So with that, I'll pause and I'll request Isabel to make opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Himendra. Thanks to the whole ThinkAg team for being with us today. It's really interesting that you're talking about scaling beyond border. Let me rewind a bit. Agri-food is as old as the world, but AgriFoodTech is pretty new. As a venture investment vertical, it's really new. I still have a vivid recollection of the first agri-tech startup I met in early 2016. And guess what? It was in Bangalore. And yes, there was a lot of traffic. So people at the time were almost apologetic about being in agri-tech. Anybody who's been in that space for more than 4 years is like a veteran. And so for me, 5 years in, I'm quite happy to be almost like a dinosaur. And the mere fact that we are talking today about scaling beyond border is a testament to the rapid development of this ecosystem. We might not have many things to celebrate these days, but let's celebrate the moment because it's a big achievement. All the ingredients are in place to catalyze a positive explosion. Investors, early stage money, later stage money, talents, I would even say a second generation of agripreneurs who has learned from the first generation in India. The last thing we need, the last spark we need to ignite the wick, I would say a couple of exits. That's it. And that's indirectly why we are here today. The day a startup can say, hey, look, it's not just an Indian story, a much larger gate opens. Not just a larger market for sure, but also a wider pool of potential investors. So for me, scaling beyond borders is the catalyst for explosive growth for startups and for the ecosystem. And at ID Capital, we can help in quite a way. So we are the entity behind the Future Food Asia platform, the annual startup competition and the conference. For those who don't know us, we have quite a few strings to our bow. We always felt like there is more than just investing ourselves, which we do. If we can influence thousands of people, isn't it a more desirable outcome than just investing? So think of us as a compass to navigate through opportunities in Southeast Asia. There is not a one-size-fits-all pathway. Sorry, there is no easy fix. We, of course, have privileged relationship with corporate partners, and thanks to Rahul for representing Corteva, to Jonathan for representing Cargill. These guys, they know more than one or two things about scaling up, believe me. You have Singapore in Southeast Asia, which is a powerful R&D ecosystem, best place to do business, strategic hub to conquer Southeast Asian markets. What's in for you? It really depends on your line of business, but for entrepreneurs, it's a no-brainer. With 5 weeks to go before we close the applications to the 5th edition of Future Food Asia, I would really like to encourage entrepreneurs to apply because that's also how we can unlock value for them in Southeast Asia. There will be winners, but few. There will be finalists, more, and there will be a wider pool of startups that we will help regardless. But again, like in the saying, all those who have won have applied. So we welcome you sooner rather than later. And I hand over to Himendra to have a round discussion about the opportunities in the region.
Thanks, Isabel. Very well said. You're right. Even I feel that though the ecosystem is so nascent, but since some of the startups started so early, it feels like a veteran. And I think Krishna and Taran, I will put them in that bucket. And they've kind of become role models for a lot of young startups to follow. And I think they are sitting on an opportunity to go global. So of course we'll discuss about that as we go along in the discussion. But let me start with Jonathan. Jonathan, if you can share Cargill's approach to disruptive innovations and in particular, the digital startup that you're incubating in India. So that's my first question to you. And probably I'll ask you another question as well. You can answer both together. If you can also talk about Cargill's Farm to Fork Accelerator with Techstars and Ecolab, with particular focus on Indian startups that are part of it, and how Cargill is supporting in taking those startups globally. Over to you, Jonathan.
Sure. Thanks, Himendra. And thanks for the opportunity to be on the panel. It's great to be a part of this roundtable of experts. So talking about Cargill, I think for us, what we're looking at with regards to disruptive innovation, today we've got 3 pillars of which we started to go down our whole disruptive innovation journey. We have we've recently launched Cargill Ventures, which is basically looking at managing all our external equity investments into early stage companies, and this is where Cargill has potentially a strategic interest in. And this group is basically looking and scouting for solutions worldwide, not just in India, not just in the US or Europe. It's basically a worldwide venture opportunity. We also have a new R&D and innovation capability looking at doing more research into development into food technology, food sciences, and really exploring how we can actually drive the development, of some of the key strategic pillars that we have, more from a technology angle itself, from a R&D perspective. And the last pillar that we have that really drives our whole disruptive innovation is what we call our Entrepreneurial Digital Growth Engine, which is a venture building program that really supports our teams in terms of building new digital ventures using entrepreneurial methodologies, as well as providing mentoring and internal support for the growth of these ventures itself. And I've been working with one of them from India, and this is a new startup that we will actually be officially launching in the market tomorrow. And we're really excited to accelerate the launch of these new ventures called Digital Sati, which it aims to really improve the livelihoods of small and marginal landholders in India, by really solving some of the key problems and challenges, using things from agri-science advisory solutions like weather forecasting, pest detection, crop practices, providing insights into all these different types of solutions, and to the market itself. And this is going to be launched in Davangere tomorrow, in fact. And it's one of those ideas in terms of, we believe that we are able, as a corporate, we are able to be able to support and build the whole startup ecosystem. So the team is working on the ground, and it's super exciting. For me, it's super exciting to be able to be a part of that, even though I am based in Singapore today. So hopefully one day I'll be able to get on the ground there. Coming to your second question around our Farm to Fork Accelerator. So Cargill over the last couple of years has partnered with Techstars and Ecolab, and to have a Farm to Fork Accelerator that we run out of our headquarters in Minneapolis. And over there, we've over the last couple of years, we've seen a number of Indian startups that have come through the program. For example, one of which is the first program, I think the name of the startup is called Spoonshot. An insights platform that combines AI, food science, and large data sets to provide customer insights into trends before they actually occur. This is an Indian startup, but they have a team that is distributed across the world. And right now, I think from what I understand is from where they are today is that they are primarily focused on the US and EMEA market in the moment itself. Post the program, we did a quick POC with them on that to test the solution. Another one that went through the Techstars Farm to Fork Accelerator was Imagino AI, an AI solution for real-time food quality and safety. And that team was an Indian team. They had, after the program, relocated to the US to focus on business development and targeting customers in that area itself. So, coming back to this topic, we're seeing that a lot of startups are also starting to, move out, especially if they're in the space where it's technologies which are more homogeneous or more nascent in terms of being able to impact a larger proposition itself.
Great, Jonathan. Thanks very much. Thanks for sharing about Digital Sati. Looks very interesting, and of course, I think you have a good understanding of an Indian AgTech startup, and thanks for your efforts in taking them global. I'll come to Rahul now. Rahul, question for you is, we all know that Corteva has been very vocal about their smallholder farmer focus in the past. Could you give us some more insights into Corteva's agri-tech collaboration, partnerships and avenues in India and Asian markets in particular? And I think the second question, which is leading from the first question, essentially, that in startups in India tend to believe that there are many similarities between the Indian market and the Asian market. For example, Indonesia, right? Could you bust some of the myths for us? Which are the things where you believe that you, as Indian AgTech entrepreneurs, we are not accounting for when you are looking at some of the markets in Asian countries?
Great. Thank you, Mahendra. And firstly, a big thank you to both FFA, ID Capital, as well as ThinkAg for getting me over here and giving me an opportunity to talk to this great group. Lovely to be on the panel. So, Mahendra, on that first question of smallholders, right? The reason we are so vocal about smallholders is it's driven from our purpose, right? Some companies call it a purpose, others call it a mission, but really our purpose is all about how do you enrich the lives of producers and consumers and for generations to come, right? So the reason I'm kind of starting with that purpose is a lot of what we do and invest in is absolutely focused on making that purpose a reality and striving every day to get closer to perfection on that purpose, right? Then when you start to think of the Asia landscape, right, and India and ASEAN countries are great examples of it, right? They're a microcosm of what a difference you can make because of the diversified smallholder farmer populations that you have, right? Absolutely tremendous. I have a strong belief that diversity, and that diversity has many aspects to it, right? Whether it's agriculture practices, very localized, right? Whether it's the number of crops, whether it's the participation of male farmers, female farmers, different regions within each of those countries, that enriches what's available in many ways in that agricultural landscape to make a difference towards that purpose. And that's why the focus on smallholder farmers, right? That purpose becomes very real. What that also means is number of challenges, right? That diversity also represents multitude of challenges. And I really think of those challenges in two major ways in India, right? The two ways I think of those challenges in is, number one, whenever you're kind of talking about fragmentation, access, right? Whether it's access to knowledge, whether it's access to expertise, whether it's access to practices, access to technology, you can keep going on, financing, and all of that builds onto itself, right? That access is absolutely crucial, and getting that access together is absolutely crucial. The second way that I think of the challenge very much is effectiveness, right? And when I say effectiveness, it's all about precision, technology, the role of technology in that precision. How do you do it in a timely way so that you're not being able to, you're not having to kind of reinvent the wheel every time, and it's a capability truly of effectiveness that you can replicate it and do it and scale it effectively. Much of our focus around partnering with startups is driven around these two areas. Okay? Of course, we've explored many avenues, right? If you think of Corteva globally is known for one of the largest ag tech exits that's taken place globally, right? And that was quite a few years ago, right? We are also very much remaining in that landscape. So we do have active funds with other partners where we participate in investing. We participate in other events. FFA is a great example. There have been hackathons, multiple others where we participate, and there are partnerships that come out of it, getting to know each other's capabilities with startups and really developing that relationship. And then finally, in this microcosm in Asia, we've got all the different aspects, right? And in India and ASEAN are perfect in that. We've got field production, R&D, breeding, all of those different aspects in nearly each of these major markets. Guess what that means? What that means is there is a perfect opportunity to be able to develop pilots that are scalable. Many a times, that conceptualization of a pilot is very much with those relationships between founders and us. And that's really important to us. And we've taken advantage of that along with advantage of those capabilities along with founders to be able to help other companies test and scale also. So that's a great avenue. On your second question, firstly, I would say there are similarities, right? Between the Indian market and the ASEAN market. Definitely, there are some similarities, and I kind of spoke about those similarities. The one part I would kind of add also is the thing that I said earlier, ag is local, right? And it's local in multiple ways: practices, cultural practices, agriculture knowledge, and most importantly, the value chains. Indonesia, great example. The role and how the government at a local level as well as a central level is organized versus India is very different. And you have to deal with that. You have to be conscious of that. You have to deal with that. Second one, I would say, is one of the most critical things that I've seen is if you go it alone, it's too long a journey. And selecting the right partner, probably with those localized capabilities, get all of those elements that you need is one of the most crucial steps that you can take. And the final one, I can go on with this list, but the final one I would kind of speak to is this balance between the need to customize and reinvent when you enter a market and not lose your complete value proposition and start a new company when you're going to a local market, okay? I've seen that mistake take place multiple times on either side of it, right? Either too rigid or completely pivoted away from your capabilities. And I would say those are areas that I've seen those be the makers and breakers in many ways for multiple startups. And I would ask startups to focus on that really as they look at expanding into ASEAN.
Great. No, some very important points you made, Rahul. Clearly, I think one of the challenges which a lot of Indian startups see on the regulation side when they're getting into the new market, and I think they vary from geography to geography. And also, I think another important point that you mentioned is need for local partnerships. And of course, going alone is an option, but yeah, it takes much longer to crack a new market when you are on your own. So thanks very much for those remarks. I'm sure startups who are listening to it will benefit from your experience and your advice. With that, I'll go to Dheeraj. Dheeraj, from an investor lens, how do you see investing in Indian AgTech vis-a-vis investing in other markets in APAC and Southeast Asia? And do you believe that the solution that Indian AgTech is developing is those solution can go to other parts of the region?
Hemendra and ID Capital, thanks for having me first. I think, and good to be on a panel with such esteemed guests as well. I'll share my perspective, and so maybe you asked two questions in there. One, what are we seeing on the Indian AgTech side that's interesting, and whether it's applicable, and what do we see as scalability into Southeast Asian markets? So I think Indian AgTech, like you said, is, although it seems like a long journey, it's still, and I've said this multiple times before, it's still at its very inception. I think it's a very, very long time to go. It's good we have folks like Krishna and Taran and others who are showing the way to other companies, but there are lots and lots of problems to be solved. We mentioned, and these are not easy problems. And at the root of it, when you look at, as Rahul mentioned, smallholder farmers, I think one thing that's common across all smallholder markets, be it Southeast Asia, India, or Africa, is farmers take the most risk and make the least money, and which limits their ability to pay for solutions. And hence, it's a very, very different farm structure versus either Europe, US, or Latin America, where a lot of current innovation is coming from. Because there you can develop products and services which the farmer can pay for. And here we are limited by the fact that we are serving and trying to uplift millions and millions of people who just know how to take risks, but don't have either the credit worthiness, don't have the excess cash flow available, and hence you need to come up with really novel models. So I'm very, at least in whatever I've seen, I've been looking at ag, and not particularly ag tech, but just ag as well for the last 15 years. So this is probably the most exciting time I've seen in the last 15 years, that there is good talent coming in and people are coming up with novel solutions. But I'm pretty sure we can be sitting here 5 years thinking that we are far, far ahead now, as Isabel was saying. 5 years hence, hopefully there'll be both in terms of talent and in terms of solutions, there'll be far more. I do see pockets of, we've seen obviously marketplaces as one of the niche areas which is developed reasonably well in India. So marketplaces are developing amongst at least those of the things that I see Those are gaining scale quickly. There are post-harvest solutions. There are on-farm solutions. And the reason I'm kind of referring to these in pockets or sectors is not all of them are as easily kind of fungible in different markets. And going back to what Rahul mentioned, each of these markets are very, very localized. So when you go to Southeast Asia, it's not that a solution that works in India will work in Thailand or Indonesia or Myanmar, even though the common denominator is, yes, farmers don't have money, but still the ecosystem that they operate in is not identical. Even in India, as you know, it's not identical. If you start looking at even a single sector, you're providing dairy solutions in Andhra will be very different from providing dairy solutions in the north. There are, however, a few sectors that I see which are more amenable to being more global. So when you look at precision ag or on-farm solutions, there you're relying more on farm structure, which across a multitude of these markets, we're still operating in 2-acre farms or something. And hence solutions which are developed, which can work in that small farm system, be it novel inputs, be it some SaaS software, or be it using either drones or any kind of imaging technology that entrepreneurs can basically develop and make it accessible in terms of what you have to pay for it, or who pays for it for that matter in the value system. Maybe there are customers who pay for it. I think those are more amenable to be, once somebody cracks that model and cracks the unit economics, then it'll be easier to scale those up and replicate those in similar farms, be it Indonesia or other markets. So to me, I look at it as it's easier to speak of ag tech in a broad brush, but not all these businesses or not all subsectors in ag tech are equally scalable. But I think the silver lining here is India itself is such a big market that even if you're in a sector which is not easily replicable in an adjoining market, you're still sitting in a very, very large market, and there are many years to grow. That if I'd be surprised if any of the entrepreneurs say that, oh, we've cracked India and now we want to go to Myanmar or Thailand. It's like there's so much to do in India. It takes it to kind of capture that opportunity is a multi-year journey.
Thanks, Dheeraj. I think your observation on marketplace is absolutely right. I think most of the players, even in India, who are well capitalized, they're still operating in certain cities and certain regions. We don't have a pan-India marketplace model in India as of yet, both on the farm to fork and factory to farm side. And the models which are actually going beyond borders is essentially data tech, which is targeting similar profile of farmers. So I think that point is valid, and you're right. I think conquering India is going to take some time. I keep saying, it's going to be $1 trillion food economy in 10 years. And I'll be disappointed if all ag tech put together don't touch a $50 billion or $100 billion scale in next 10 years, So the sheer size of opportunity in this country is huge. But having said that, no one want to miss on a global opportunity that's also waiting. So I'll of course ask Krishna and Taran when I come to them. But before that, Isabel, you are one of those few investors who focused on APAC region. You have a thesis around the region. Why did you choose this region? You could have easily gone to Israel or Latin America or Europe. What made you stay here?
I love your question. So as often in life, there are small and big reasons. So forgive me for starting for the small one. The small one is I decided to live in Singapore 9 years back, and I love Asia, period. You can do nothing with this. I know this very well. One thing though, Singapore gives you wings. Singapore as a country is a perfect example of, punching above your weight in a way. Perfect example of the fact that size does not always matter, and is a very inspiring place to develop business. So that was the small reason. The bigger reason, Asia is the region with the widest income disparity, but it's also a region with its own dynamics. Just a couple of pointers. Asia is the #1 trading partner of China. India is really on the path of achieving its potential. The population is going to become the more numerous in this decade, with a majority of people below 40. That's the field you need to catalyze disruption and innovation. You have an economy that is growing faster than China, as an example, just to take this point. And yes, as Dheeraj said before, India is such a big market. Just raising the question of going to ASEAN seems to be almost sometimes irrelevant when you think of what needs to be achieved in India. But back to your question, I believe Asia is starting to have its own dynamics. And when you look at Asia through the lenses of American or European investors with a very distant stance on what it means to be here, you see Asia as a big region, but finally quite amorphous. You don't see the difference between one another. You completely miss what Rahul, what Jonathan, what Dheeraj said, that there is a cliff even between Vietnam and Cambodia. And there is a cliff between India and Thailand. It's not just between Singapore and Cambodia that there is a cliff. There is a cliff everywhere. Situations are dramatically different. But intra-Asia trade starts to become a thing. And so we really believe there is a new dynamics in this region, which is supportive of the agri-food tech ecosystem. We are not just dreaming of it. We've seen it happening big time over the past few years. But let me just mention one figure. Would you be able to tell how many Series B plus startups there are in Asia Pacific in agri-food tech? 300, 200, less than 60. Less than 60, and of course, it's accelerating. We've seen recently 6 Series Bs closing across Asia Pacific. There are a few beautiful Indian startups, well, not to mention Cropin, of course, but 60 is still relatively small. And yet, that's the region where things are going to happen in the next few years. Hence us, hence Future Food Asia, hence the fact that 2 years ago, we gave a tagline, a name to our conference. We said the future of food is Asian. Well, we should say not only Asian, but quite Asian. And last year, in the midst of the pandemic, we said food is the new cool. And we didn't try to be abrasive or just provocative. We just wanted to reflect what's happening in the region. It's fabulous. It's once in a lifetime opportunity, really.
Right, Isabel. No, thanks very much. I can tell you that number of 60, of course, it's low, but it can balloon any day, the day we see a mega exit. And of course,
it would triple overnight the day you have an exit.
But I think that's also, as a matter of expectation, when startups are so young, I think that's where the challenge comes. You need a certain scale to get to an exit. Of course, I'm sure in India we want to see probably that the first mega exit in 2023, 24 maybe, maybe four, 5 unicorns in next 4 to 5 years. But you're right. I think we need many more late stage investors to accelerate that scale. So I think point well taken, and thanks for your remarks, Isabel. Maybe I can go to Krishna now. He's patiently sitting in his car. Krishna, I think you are someone who's gone to 50 plus countries, and I don't know anyone, at least in India, who has presence in so many countries and digitized millions of acres and working, solving for problems for millions of farmers, right? And just talk about the opportunity that you as Indian AgTech has to go global and the challenges that you faced, when you are going from India to, let's say, Thailand or to Malaysia or any other Asian country. And also, does Asian countries behave differently than, let's say, European countries? I don't know if you're in America. What is the flavor, when it comes to Asia?
Sure. So, scaling up globally also depends on what problem you are solving and for which segment, right? So we are B2B in nature. We are AI and data platform helping large enterprises to manage their agronomy data and look at the same data differently to improve their per acre value in their value chain, correct? Now, so the moment you talk about the enterprise, you have to go global. You can't go and sell your product to a client and say, "Oh, I just operate in India." But if you have operation in Indonesia, you have to look for some other solution, or for Kenya, or for that matter, LATAM. So then you have to, you have to work and a lot to do with your product and the solution which you're promising, right? So in our case, it was, it was more data. We didn't say that we are the experts in agronomy. And we can't be. I mean, I mean, if you look at the enterprise, they have been existing for 100 years, and they have much better scientists who knows the localization, who knows how to grow the same potato variety in India versus Kenya versus Indonesia versus Latam versus Europe, right? So, so practices will change, climatic conditions are changed. But then the underlying principle which we want to solve was data is a data. And when data, if you build a global language for the data and build analytics on top of it, which can be consumed, it doesn't matter which location, which crop. So we are crop agnostic and location agnostic. And if you are targeting B2B, you can't be local. You have to go global with this enterprise. Other, Otherwise, they are not going to be on a 10 different platform managing same potato because they're doing in different countries. So that was given the way we thought about building crop in, right? So we have to build frameworks. We have to build SOP and standards for this industry to adopt in terms of becoming more data driven. Because when we started, I think we were globally first company, or maybe one of the few companies who started thinking data driven, right? So if you look at farm logs, and there are many other startups in Europe, US and Europe came after 2012, who started talking about SaaS and data driven. We started in 2010, and that was with a vision to use B2B uh, network to reach to the farmer and create that impact on every acre where you want to deploy your solution. And we chose B2B because we knew it's very difficult to sell to individual farmer going every village. So if you look at India, we have got 650,000 odd villages. And then there are 150 million farmers in those villages, right? So how do you build a value proposition for each of the farmers and go sell one in one, and then do the collections as well if you have your business model in terms of generating revenue, right? But then we also realized there are so many B2B players, and all these farms are connected with those B2B network, whether it's a farm processing company or a contract farming or export-oriented company, or they are connected with the input companies who are selling seeds or inputs and fertilizers, correct? So we knew that they will need this SOP, and that's why we went into this whole enterprise uh, uh, driven softwares, which we wanted to build, driven by data and AI. So that's how it helped us to scale. And when in initial days, I traveled almost most of the countries which are prominent location for agriculture, LATAM, US, Europe. What I found was forget about the practices, right? So there is a potato which is to be grown in a different way because the variety is different and climatic condition is different and soil is different. But the problem statement of every farmer remains the same, right? So how do I deal with my changing climate? How do I deal with my pest? What is my prediction on my farm, right? What prescription I should use? And that was not changing whether you go to a large farm holding market or a small holding market. So I remember my discussion with one of the farmers in Mexico. He was doing his potato, I think 250 hectare of farm under the hill, and he says we are so scared of there was one pest that if that happens, it wipes out almost all my farm, right? And we want to get rid of this problem, and we want to know when it is going to happen, and so that we can take the precautions. And when I see India, we have the similar problems, right? So we want to deal with the pest, we want to improve the productivity, we want traceability to export from this country to other country. So the on the higher level problem doesn't change, and at the lower dimension problem, which is the localized practices, can you can always build with your partner, and you can ship, because that's a platform we have built, right? So you take the platform. It's a crop and location agnostic and personalized for any location. So you can have same potato 100 location with the different practices, right? So that can be disseminated. So that's what we wanted to solve, and it helped us to also go global, because we went enterprise. We're dealing with multiple countries, and they wanted to take it. Also, technology doesn't have a boundaries, right? You can ship it across the boundaries sitting here because of SaaS is AWS, and you just need to provide login, online trainings, and it's deployed over hundreds and thousands of farmers in that country. right? So that's the power of the technology. Hemendra, what was your second question? Sorry, uh,
No problem. I'll come back to you. I think I'll go to panel and come back to you. No problem. But I think
yeah.
the point that you mentioned in terms of homogeneity in problem statements and the infra, the tech infra, I think that's also similar. I think this probably is helping a lot of tech platforms to go from one country to another. Taran, your views are, I'm tracking you right from the beginning, and I think you were very clear from day one that you want to build solutions for the global markets, right? And of course, we have very high expectation out of you for sure. How do you see Indian agri-tech becoming sort of a global hub for agri-tech innovations for the world, and maybe in particular for Asia? Do you see we have that opportunity? And if yes, how do we capitalize on that? You have to unmute.
Thank you for, I think, a wonderful question, first of all. Does India stand at a point where it can build a technology for a global onslaught? Definitely yes. Uh, and that's where I think I agree with Krishna and what you said, Heminder, earlier, that homogeneity of application of the problem statement is very, very critical. In India itself, India changes every 100 kilometers. It is not easy to, have a data-driven solution being applied. And if you're not building something which can go beyond 100 to 100,000 kilometers of scale across the world, you are not able to build something that the world needs. And I think that's where India stands at a point where we have understood a cycle of software, and the new innovations that are coming are a lot in the AI space as well as, I would say, hardware. And that's just the start of I think, the Indian AgTech scenario, where the cusp of hardware and AI has just started to, getting disseminated into solutions. And I think that's where India stands a very, very strong chance of building something which can fast surpass, anyone who has not gone through these cycles of software, hardware, and AI. And I think this is where, if Indian startups start focusing, the homogeneity of application becomes very, very relevant when it comes to other countries. For example, we started with one application in grains. We moved to more than 600 locations in India with one of the prominent, I would say, companies out of India in procurement of grains. Within no time, we got an order for 400 locations in Indonesia. So now we are scaling to 400 locations in Indonesia just because the problem statement is almost the same. And the deployment of the technology needs that, it needs to be, the software has to be integrated with AI for local infusion and understanding of the commodity and application to the purchase, selling, buying that is happening at that value chain itself. Now, this is just one example. Similarly, if I talk about one of the commodities that we are very, very focused on is milk and feed, two very, very strong in the livestock. A technology that we have created to, analyze more than 14 parameters of milk whenever the milk is getting transacted. As you can understand, India's 2% of GDP is milk. So the kind of scale we are talking about is massive. And we already started getting, all the inbounds from UK, New Zealand, that, hey, can we do assessments of milk for, a better cheese that we want to do, because nobody does protein instantly on the field. So, these are things, new tech, which requires a lot of understanding of AI, hardware, and software. And that's the next wave that is coming in terms of, building a global onslaught out of India. And I would say the 2010 to 2020 was a wave of, a lot of software applications being built in healthcare, in other, and agriculture, imbibing those best practices and building a global value. But, in data sciences, what they say is that data should be the purest. And that's where you cannot have just a person filling in and getting it. You need to have new data streams to, build your solutions. And that's where new devices, new hardware, new AI applications have to be built. And I think that's where the opportunity lies. I gave you just an example of milk already getting inbounds from multiple countries. And another one that I would like is animal feed. We worked for around 8 months to get our first client, which is India's largest feed company. They are putting pan India around more than I would say somewhere around $400 million worth of procurement through our platform. And we got connected with CPG, and they were like, you know what, this is required across Asia. So we're just talking about solving local, but
Yeah,
going
correct.
global.
So that's my question to you. Just stemming from what you said, you getting so many opportunities from India, from outside India, and you have limited resources, right? So there's an order from Telangana, there's an order from Thailand. How do you solve this conundrum? What do you want to prioritize, a Thailand or a Telangana? What's your view? Given the fact that the resources for a startup are limited.
Yes, I think it is more to do with you know I mean it's more about how you are solving in Telangana and how you are solving in CPG, for example, in Thailand and other countries, Cambodia. What looks more feasible that our client. So if you remain customer centric, that you are solving something for the customer, I think that will give you the answer. Because in Telangana, we can just go and get it done tomorrow. But when we are talking about Cambodia, Thailand, obviously the resource constraint, as well as what you rightly said, Himinder, is partnership constraint. You cannot do anything alone. What Rahul said is absolutely perfect statement. You cannot conquer the world on your own. You have to work with a lot of partners who work with you. So that's why we are looking at CB Group out there, let's say, to helping us to take it to other. In Africa, we are looking at similarly partners like KTDA. We are in tea and Kenya Tea Development Agency is what we are looking to partner to, take it. In India, similarly, we have done for tea, we signed up. In fact, right now I am sitting just behind a tea garden. I just came rushing from the tea garden, just the tea garden behind me. And,
No, I think Krishna sitting in car and you sitting in a tea garden, I think is a message to all the entrepreneurs listening to this webinar.
Oh, yeah.
Irrespective of your age, you're always chasing the customers.
Yes, I mean, customer first. If you're building something global, you have to be customer centric. You have to literally, put a chair and think that the customer is sitting next to you, whatever you're thinking. Because if you don't do that, we are not building something for the globe. Because, even in India, I mean, if I go to Punjab and if I go to Andhra, I mean, a chili in Andhra will ask a different requirement than a chili in Maharashtra. For example, we have built now the first solution for chili assessment, which is actually a very, very low cost, full image processing, getting deployed at 10,000 locations. We are working for Niti Aayog along with ITC and BMGF. It's getting, it took us almost a year to build that technology. But now we are just getting inbounds and we got a huge praise because the farmers loved it. That I am now certain, the farmer said we are certain that we will be now assessed on quality with the right technology. That gives us a lot of confidence. Not even the companies. If the farmers ratifies, then there's nothing left in the world to ratify further. So that's where we believe, that this is where we can now scale chili globally. So now the question whether Thailand comes or Indonesia or Sri Lanka, I think it will all depend on which partner comes first and sits with us.
Absolutely.
For God's sake, we will be always resource constrained because agri is like a financial sector. It is so big. So, me and Krishna will always remain in, constraint forever in life. So we just have to optimize and probably build an AI that will solve that problem first.
Well said, Tani. So thanks for some very useful tips, Taran. I am sure it's very motivating for all the entrepreneurs listening to you. So I'll go back to Jonathan. Jonathan, you've seen the startup ecosystem, you have your learnings, and as Cargill, you have a very global view on agriculture, right? What are the 2 or 3 tips that you want to give to entrepreneurs listening to this webinar? If they want to scale the solution beyond borders, what are the 2 or 3 things? I think Rahul said a few things on need for partnerships, and what would be your message to them?
No, I think Tarun has very clearly articulated that, right? It's really about partnerships and collaboration. I think in today's context, no matter what we do, even if we're a large corporate, like Cargill, or a small startup, that is on the ground, it's always about collaboration and how do we actually collaborate to solve the problems that are facing the customers, right? So I mean, my 2 cents, being someone who has spent a lot of time working with startups and helping startups to operate within the corporate context. My my view really is that it's find a way that you can engage with the corporate partner in a sense that you're going at it together, right? Not just I'm a startup, I'm here to help you solve certain problems that you might have. Is how can we together co-create and build something that is going to make a difference for in the lives of the customers itself, right? I work a lot in the digital space. I think one of the biggest challenges that we see is really around how do you have a seamless integration of both the physical infrastructure as well as the digital layers. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed realistically for us to be able to drive home new technology and the adoption of new technology. As the others on this panel has rightly said, it's ag is a massive, and Indian ag is in itself a massive opportunity, is a massive space, is a massive market. And it's how do we actually collaborate to do that? We can't do it alone. I don't think anybody can do it alone. We all have to work together to find that sweet spot in terms of being able to bring value for the customer and for the whole ecosystem in itself.
Thanks, Jonathan. I think that those are very, very important tips. And I'll go back to Rahul. Rahul, I think you said it well, the need for local partnerships. But tell us, as Corteva, as Cargill, as ID Capital, or as ThinkEgg, how do we catalyze these partnerships? There's no institutional framework, right? Everyone is trying on their own. Can we put some structure around it to make it happen faster?
So, Hemendra, excellent question, and a challenging one, I would say, right? So we all love structures for sure, right? And the reality of the situation is you kind of were talking about right at the beginning the number of startups in India, right, that are coming up, right? And then we start thinking of the amount of fragmentation out in the ag market space itself, right? And Tarun kind of Taranjit spoke about that fragmentation, how localized, that's what gives its richness, but also presents challenges, right? My thinking in a lot of ways, right, which I feel like is something we all can do better, right? Across the different stakeholders. Many a times, depending on who approached whom, it becomes a question of you define the value. The person approaching defines the value, okay, to the other players. My strong belief that definition of value for each of the partners is a collaborative effort. Forums, structures that can enable us to have that conversation and have that back and forth, that creative dialogue around what that value creation opportunity for each of the partners is and where those capabilities are complementary. I think are something unique that is needed in the Asian landscape due to the nature of the smallholders, multiple levels of fragmentation and all of that. So I think there is a role over there for somebody to be able to create those platforms, and they're truly creative platforms to be able to collaborate over there, in my view. The second point, which I think many a times becomes the issue, right, is one partner wants to go all in, another partner is interested in testing, de-risking, right? And these are just the nature of an entrepreneurial company versus companies which have more structures too, right? And you find a lot of those, including governments in between, right? Where you and I know the challenges that can happen with that. And I think what that tells you really is being able to, in many ways, approaching this as proof of concept of that value delivery and complementary capabilities, which is not too small, but also not large, but is large enough that it gives you confidence to scale. I think that's the sweet spot, right? It's I know I sound probably a little bit like Goldilocks porridge over there, right? Just right. But to me, that's the challenge, right? It's that just right where each of us can really benefit in a big way. And then the final one I would kind of put in, right, is focus initially on that value creation, right? As long as you're focused on the value creation in that value chain, value extraction, there are multiple models that can come together for value extraction, right? The initial focus has to be that value creation and complementary capabilities on value creation. Many a times, it can be the cart before the horse, where somebody's thought a lot more about the value extraction and we use that as a filter rather than the value creation itself. So that would be my last point, Himendra, on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Rahul. Absolutely. I think value creation, get your homework done right before you start looking at the broader picture. But yeah, absolutely. I think personally, I feel there's a need for platform which can facilitate these dialogues across countries, geographies, curate partners for startups. I think that will make life much more easy, and Taran can sit in a tea garden in Sri Lanka, maybe much more, not just India. And I think it will be easier for Krishna also to maybe look at 80 countries, why 50, if there are platforms like that.
Himendra, if I can just add, so I won't promise to Taran that he can sit quietly in a tea garden. That I cannot promise. But what I can say for sure is when we started Future Food Asia in 2016, we had this vision that corporates would be tremendously important in this sector in particular. In Agri-Food, they are most of the time the go-to partner. Trees don't go to the sky. In AgriFoodTech, startups don't go to the sky without having very strong local partners. So we've built a platform for it. Future Food Asia is really first and foremost about connecting startups with potential customers and potential partners, even before the connection with investors. You might find it surprising, but for me, the kind of obsession I have when I advise startup founders or when we discuss with potential investment target is, where are your clients? If you have a good corporate partner and he asks you to go to Malaysia or Thailand, go with him. As opposed to strategizing on whether Thailand is better than Malaysia, don't overthink it. You have a corporate partner, you have a client, you have revenues or potential revenues, go for it. Customer money is better than investors' money if you can make it first, of course. So we've really built a platform on the ground that it's not that trivial to facilitate collaborations between the big and the small. Rahul made it very clear. I don't need to hammer it, but it's not that simple. And we've developed these skill sets to know where are the needs, how to bridge the gap between the short-term, imperatives of the startups and the fairly lengthy process of corporations where stakes are very layered and the complexity is not invented, it's here for a reason. And we know how to navigate through this ecosystem. So how we help giving visibility to startups that will help funding, but more than anything else, we help building value-add partnerships.
Thanks, Isabel. I also say chase customers and investors follow. So
not that we don't like investors, don't get me wrong, but customers are good.
So that brings me to Dheeraj. Dheeraj, as an investor, how critical is to look at the global scale or the solution being more global in nature while you're evaluating an investment? You can always have a lot of local solution which can scale, right? But do you think as an investor, is that paradigm changing, particularly in the context of agri-tech, to look at the global, the ability to globalize or regionalize that solution? Is that critical from an investor perspective?
Some people may not agree with me, but I think at least my view is we'll just look at addressable markets. So I think, when you're investing in the US, people don't ask, oh, can you go to South America or can you go to Europe? Yes, that's upside. So it should be no different that if you have a large market available to you in your local market, yes, going overseas is always an option and it's a growth avenue, but it's not imperative. So I would not be biased against a company which provides a great local solution and has a very large market available to them in India, versus a company which can provide a global solution, but maybe the entire market available to them is small because of the problem they're solving.
But some
So
solutions are, I would say, genetically tuned to become global. Like, let's say, digital solutions out of India, or an alternative protein solution out of Singapore, or
so absolutely. What I'm trying to say is there are obviously businesses and ideas which are more amenable to being used in other markets, and yes, they benefit from the advantage of, at times, a larger addressable market, because the entrepreneur tells us, the same solution can be used in X, Y, and Z market. But for example, so if you are solving or you're solving for a problem which is generally small, but even in 10 markets it's a $500 million TAM, versus solving a very, very critical problem in a single market which is a $5 billion TAM. So I think that's the distinction that I'm trying to make. It's always, for investors, it always gives kind of comfort or additional growth avenues, and our at least most of the time our encouragement to our companies is, and basically that's where we add value. So yes, we should chase customers where investors can help, is basically providing opportunities to globalize, and both in terms of inputs of what we are seeing in other markets. But it's what I'm trying to say, it's not a black and white answer, that if you can't apply it in another market, it's not a good business. I wouldn't discourage any local entrepreneur who has a good idea not to pursue it just because it cannot be applied in regional markets.
Absolutely, I think that's very well said. And as as said earlier, also, in India, for example, we $500 billion food economy moving to other $1 trillion. So there'll be many solutions which will continue to be local. And I think as an investor, the time is extremely critical. And I totally understand where you're coming from. So thanks very much for bringing that point out. Krishna, the question that I was asking you was, how different are Asian markets vis-a-vis, let's say, the markets in Africa, or let's say evolved markets like Europe or in America? Do you see, and also the kind of challenges that you face, in terms of finding local partners, in terms of navigating the local regulations and stuff like that? Do you see that these markets behave differently?
I mean, by sheer nature of agriculture, Southeast Asia, India, and the and based on the crop they're doing will be definitely different. But India and Southeast Asia has a lot of similarity, right? Because smallholder farmers and the problems are also almost similar. And when you go to Africa, while the smallholder market, but the challenges are also different than India and Southeast Asia. For example, internet bills or connectivity, right? So the costs are higher than these markets. When you go to large holding market, as I said, the first degree problem remains the same, and the second and the third degree problems really matches with whether you are in Southeast Asia or Africa or LATAM, right? So it doesn't changes when you change the country and continent, like how to improve the yield, how to improve the quality, how to get more predictability from their business or for their farms. No matter which part of the world you are, no bank wants to take the risk because they really don't have that much understanding of the risk in ag, and they treat. And if you are a newcomer in the business who are taking up this farming, then they treat it as a higher risk business because that entrepreneur has never done farming before, right? So the access to capital remains a challenge across the globe, whether it's a large farmer, small or small farmer. So I think there are similarities. The problem statement changes depending on what lens you're looking at, in which country. But the fundamental challenges remain same, right? The climate change, yield, productivity. That's on everybody's mind, and that need to be solved at scale, and not only pertaining to India or Southeast Asia. But but yeah, I mean, there are different challenges in different countries. Partners, I believe, different market operates very differently. I can speak for what experience I had like working with the B2B. So we go B2B. We don't directly work with farmers, and for us B2B remains same across the globe, right? So they
Krishna, you gone on mute. Krishna, he's hung up. Krishna, can you hear us?
Hello.
Yeah, you were. We couldn't hear you for last few seconds.
Okay. Yeah, so I was saying it's almost from the B2B perspective, the paying capacity changes depending on which market you are operating in. But the adoption remains same, the questions remain same, the problem statement of the B2B remains same. So for example, Africa is more donor-driven market, right? So even the large enterprise will have some donor-driven money to implement and see how they can create an impact, right? Similarly, in Southeast Asia is driven by both. And then in Europe, it's more like a enterprise client, the US enterprise client who would like to take it on their PNL. So yeah, so different region, different problems, but not from the ag point of view. It remains same. Yeah. I mean, I hope I answered your question.
No, of course, but we want you to write a book on it because there's so many nuances. no one else can capture better than you in terms of what you did in Kenya versus what you did in Cambodia. I think you're the right person to write about it. So my last question before we go to the audience question, I think that's my last question is to Taran. Taran, this whole global SaaS opportunity, we have seen in India so many startups in other sectors, many of them have become unicorns and have attracted so much of investment. How far we from seeing an Indian global SaaS play? And what are the challenges, which you see to make that happen? You have to unmute.
I think again a very, very nice question I would like to take up. My guess is 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Or in Point Manila's simple answer would be a 3-year timeline for the first $1 billion valuation company in SaaS to be seen, not on a GMV trade, but on a. The reason being very simple, that whichever company that would be, it would be much differentiated than the last 10 years of just a software game.
Mm-hmm.
And also not just in software, it will be a lot of insights which are point specific, so a lot of AI applications have to be imbibed into that solution. And I think the gameplay has just started. So for people to understand that gameplay, execute, and then kind of do a runaway to, a company with a 1 billion, I would give it a time period of, somewhere around 36 months. And that's where I believe it is entirely possible that we will, I mean, you can check with me in 36 months, we will have a company. But
I'm guessing right now, and of course, I'll catch you.
We'll put a calendar reminder, Taran, no doubt about it.
Well, you have a follow-up event in 3 years for sure.
Yeah, every year we will follow you, Taranji. No doubt.
And for me and Dheeraj and Isabel to figure out who's that company. So we can come do a series B there, right?
No, it would be because the plain vanilla simple software applications, we understand, selling it at 50 locations, 100, 150 will desire a bit more customization, and that customization will only come if more layers of technologies are added on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I call it, that any company that is right now on that path, they are doing a point solution right now. A lot of thought has to go into horizontal as well as vertical SaaS that they can build onto it. That horizontal SaaS is more and more of the value that they can build at that location itself. That is, I would say, more solution per node. And then A vertical SaaS will be what are the other integration tech that they can bring at that node. For example, we can talk about, if a company is doing, let's say, some X, they can build traceability, they can build, other 3-4 things, integrate that and provide a more holistic solution to the client. However, I think, and there's a humongous opportunity. I mean, agriculture and data sciences is, I just see limitless. So 1 billion, you are too much underestimating the company or a company.
I can tell you, Taran, with my experience in other sectors, there are a lot of horizontal SaaS company looking to acquire an agri SaaS. So
Exactly. I mean, for example, Heminder, there is no company which is doing a UI path of agriculture. There is no company which is, building a full RPA because nobody has even touched AI of even 0.5% application. Even Excel sheets are not AI. AI is like so powerful neural networks that can be used on so much of agriculture. I don't think anybody has touched even 0.51% of AI till now. So when we talk about RPA, which is one stage ahead, where healthcare has gone, where there are biotech has gone, there are RPA companies coming out in abounds. Nobody has touched that in agriculture. So I'm talking about, it's a limitless world. So for your 1 billion, I will say 36 months, but please see the horizon a bit, just rise a bit and you'll see the horizon much farther.
No, absolutely. I think we all believe in that horizon, and that's why sticking to this sector for so long. So I think, of course, we are getting a lot of questions from the audience. I think some are very, very specific to each panelist. I'll request Taran, Krishna. I think they have a lot of questions. Isabel, for you, to Rahul, and even Jonathan and Dheeraj. If I think those questions we can probably answer through chat, but I'll probably take questions which are relevant for the panel as a whole. So there's a question from Azil from String Bio. Her question is, how can we implement uniform standards format in data collection, storage, and analysis for the agri sector so that the information on productivity, stress, resources, sustainability can be cross-leveraged across countries more effectively? So I think that's a great question. We don't see data uniformity even at a district level or state level for across country, but yeah, I think it's something which is I think anyone can take it. Yeah, go ahead.
I would just like to take this, Heminder, just once, if because the kind of data we have collected to build our solutions is like our major focus had been operations. For example, for collecting milk, where we are gone to more than 99.5 accuracy, highest in the world today. Our team used to start at 4 a.m. in the morning, drive 100 kilometers and collect milk from every buffalo and cow that they can do in villages. We did that for 6 months. We collected 50,000 samples of milk and got them tested in our labs. That operation is not easy to do, and forget about the AI and the hardware. Just to build that operations of collecting data, and now on the table we say we are 99.5% accurate with 14 adulterations and no parameters. That's just because the data collection had been pristine and very, very hard. Now, if I talk about, another example, I'll give you tea where I'm sitting. It took us 1.5 years to collect 600,000 images of tea leaves, segregate it, and then kind of, analyze that. And now when we are sitting, we are at 96% accuracy, which no one can match. So in order to build that AgTech company, which is on data, the first and foremost thing is exactly very, very good operations required for data collection. And I think somebody who has pointed out that data collection, how we are doing it, we can sit and talk about it. It is just pure grunt work. And you have to run across the breadth and, the width of the length and the breadth of the country, to, collect this data. For turmeric, we collected more than 4,000 samples across from Mizoram to, Erode to Punjab. And that's not easy to get it done and do the operation. So that's where I think agriculture stands at a cusp. Whosoever owns data will build one of the largest companies for sure.
Any views from you, Jonathan, Rahul, on is there potential for standardization of at least on the basic data? I'm sure there are thousands of data points, but some basic data points, soil nutrition, water stress. Is there potential for harmonization?
Maybe I'll start with this one. I think from one easy way to do it, I would say, I completely, I think I empathize with Tarun's challenge there, right? But one easy way to do it is also to partner with a large corporate or a large enterprise that has already codified a large amount of data. So, for example, we do have a ton of data that we have, and being able to work with some of our partners, you get actually you potentially will be able to leverage the data sets that we have across different markets, in fact, as well. So I think that's something that it's about the co-creation. And coming back to the earlier point, is how do we partner and how do we collaborate to do this?
Absolutely, Jonathan. I think co-creation is the way. I can tell you a little bit, since I'm working, I'm part of some of the working groups with the government, which is creating AgriStack, the pan-India data platform for agriculture. I think the philosophy there is federated structure. We can't have a large data set, but we'll have multiple data sets who can talk to each other. So that's where standardization, harmonization, interportability becomes extremely critical. So I think absolutely right. I think it's all about co-creating rather than reinventing the whole.
I think the reality is that working when you have to get everybody on leveraging a common methodology in terms of data collection, that makes that challenge in itself is a huge problem, and maybe maybe a startup should come along to try and solve that problem in effect, right?
So I think if I may add, I am not very optimistic about that, and there are specific reasons. When we talk about large corporate, everyone wants to own the data, and if data was commoditized and standardized and available to all, then it's of no value. Because if it was uniform access to everybody to standardized data, it stops being a differentiator. And in today's age, and it might change after 10 years or something, in today's age, everybody is after that data. So much so that when you go to Western markets, when 5 people or 10 people or 100 people pursue farmers for on-farm data, suddenly they start realizing that this data is valuable. Nobody cared about their data 20 years ago, but when 10 people approach you saying, I want your data, they suddenly realize there's something here, and they don't want to share it anymore. So they're saying, why should I share it with John Deere for free? Why should I share it with Cargill for free? Why should I share it for Corteva for free? What do I get? And finally, all this data that we are seeking, unless there's a way of very transparently saying how the farmer will benefit from it and not have to pay for more services and not have to pay for, they don't want to part with it. And you can't blame that. So inter-country or something like that, it's just, unless there was like a government body or something that was doing it, which I don't think that this is the highest priority to have farm data. The only standardized data that you'll see in the US is maybe collected by USDA and for regulatory purposes or something. Otherwise, even you go one step lower, when you want to collect standardized data, you need to have standardized hardware also. What sensor are you using? What company is providing that sensor? There'll be another company will come that I can do better soil data than I can do better water data. So it's a great concept, and it'll definitely be useful to a lot of companies, and it'll definitely be useful for a lot of advancement of research. But I just think practically it's very, very hard to, at least in the near future, I cannot imagine a time where you get standardized data sets. All what you can possibly get is maybe 1 or 2 entrepreneurial or brilliant companies which make data collection easier and hence get popular, and can provide a very clear value creation platform for farmers that they are themselves attracted to it, saying, I want to give my data to this company so because I benefit from it. So you might see larger data sets being done in formats where companies can show benefits. Otherwise, it will be fractured. You will always have newer companies coming up with newer data sets which they want to keep proprietary.
I totally completely agree with Diraj, and I would add maybe data collection is a very important part of the job of these startups building on data. It goes without saying. As opposed to dreaming about a world where data would become a bit more homogeneous, I think the value proposition of many of these startups will dramatically increase if they have a layer in their stack where they do a bit of data engineering, and out of heterogeneous data, they manage to get a stream of information which is fairly homogeneous, exploitable in such a way that you kind of offset the heterogeneity of the data in the first place. That I think is doable, and it's building the value proposition of the startup, and it's really making a difference. Dreaming that the streams of data would become more blendable, I don't believe so.
And maybe, Hemendra, if you don't mind, I'll just maybe give a quick example, and I think it gets to the point that both Isabel and Dheeraj were making, right? So two areas of value creation, right? So the one area, because of what's wrong, what's so difficult about those data sets, right? The one area of value creation is firstly the collection part, right? There is a value over there, but it's a roundabout way to think of value, okay? So the roundabout way is, I'll give you the example of you're creating value somewhere else. Your monetization might be with the power of that data, right? You look at the example of drones in China, and believe me, those two largest companies over there, right? Over $1 billion valuation, right? Many of us think of them as drone companies, but really, what are they? They are today drone application companies, but data companies. They are data powerhouses in many a way, right? So the data is a subset of that value creation that they did over there. The second one, and I think probably in many ways, Krishna is more suited to talk about this one than anybody else over here, right? It's that power of being able to take very discrete and broad data sets that might be arranged very differently and establishing valuable insights to farming operations from those. And I think I wouldn't describe it anything more because that's not my sphere, but I'm sure Krishna would talk about the value you can create by doing that.
Yeah. I think you rightly said, you can't create value with a discrete data set. If you are localized and if you have a bucketized data, it will not make sense until unless you spread your data across climatic zones, across crops, and across variety. I mean, we have trillions of data sets, but we do fall short of, certain varieties, certain windows are different, certain characteristics are very, very different. And your model need to learn about all these different characteristics. Now, the beauty is, if you're a SaaS company, the fastest way to grow is distribute as fast as you can and as many places as you can, right? So and make this whole SOP data collection easier, as it was mentioned some time back, so that this data can become the next basis to create the we call it as a farm in a box solution, right? So there's a layer of data which is getting generated. You rightly said, why should farmer? It's a farmer data. It's his own property, right? Now, if somebody comes and say, because of this information, and if somebody has access to the data, he will let's say, underwrite a loan to you because you need this as a working capital in your farm, or to experiment something out of that. Somebody is ready to give you a coverage maybe at the a lower interest rate because he understands the risk better. So somewhere, it can't be just done by a startup, or it has to be a partnership between public, private startups coming together and building this stack solution, and then go with the value proposition to the end farmer, saying, because here is a layer of analytics which provide the risk to the people who need it, who can underwrite their underwrite loans for you, or influence for you, or take any kind of measures which is needed at your farm. So I think it's a long road. You need a lot of data, and you need a different way of training your models. I don't think machine learning way is a way to go forward. I think there are we are discussing representation learning. How can you replace your human eye, right? So if something passes in front of your eye, you know what exactly it is, but model will never know. And I think it's a lot of work needs to be done, a lot of collaboration needs to be done. Data is going to be a challenge. governments are going to put a lot of regulation around it. They want to keep the data in their country. Corporates want to keep their data, on their platform. Farmer doesn't want to give the data because a lot of laws are coming in. I think there will be some intersection, which creates a value for the ecosystem, not only for farmer, not only for the corporate. So we have to look at how can we create a poetic value for the ecosystem, which creates a shared value for everyone. I think that will be the key going forward. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think this is one of those topics which probably calls for one more webinar. We can go on, and it's such a sensitive issue, and I've done so many sort of webinars on this topic that more I think of it, more complex it seems, but I think at the same time the need for such data platform is also going up. And I take your point, Krishna, on building a public-private. I think there's a role for public ecosystem clearly to build a certain data layer, which may be very, very basic. What India Stack did. And in agriculture also, in India, at least in the state of Odisha, for example, state of Telangana, there are data layers which are being developed. Of course, it's not open for everyone so far, but I guess at some stage it will be. But the bigger question which regulators are asking, what is in it for the farmer? Of course, you can create a startup, you can create so much APIs and which can drive your valuation, but is the farmer benefiting out of this data, sharing the data? That's like a $1 billion question in itself.
I think governments should start asking a different question. They should ask, what is the value you are creating for the ecosystem? We should not be biased just from the farmer or a corporate or a partner perspective. We should say, what are you creating for the ecosystem?
Yeah,
right?
as long as it's value for everyone.
Yeah.
I think the awareness of that value is something which is difficult to sort of decide at the beginning, but I'm sure that will fall in place. So
yeah.
So I guess we are almost towards the end of the discussion. There are some very, very thought-provoking question in the chat box, but I think in the interest of time, probably it's time to say thank you, a big thank you to all of you, Jonathan, Rahul, Krishna, Dheeraj, Taran, and of course, Isabel, for being on the panel. Some very, very interesting thoughts, and we all agree that we need to build some ecosystem play to make this transition happen for likes of Krishna and Taran to move to new territories. So I think we should keep the dialogue going. I sincerely hope it's the beginning of the dialogue and not the end of it. So with that, a big thank you to all of you. A big thank you to all the audiences who are on the call. Sorry, we could not take many of your questions, but we'll try and address them offline. Isabel, any closing remarks from you?
It was great to be here today with you. Agree that it's just the beginning of the journey. It's a long journey, but we have very positive signs to celebrate, as I said earlier. So we should also look back and be happy with what we have achieved. We have fantastic entrepreneurs in the room and very committed investors. And I'm looking at Dheeraj, but there are many behind him. So thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Isabel.